during computers. I started seeing pictures of people playing modular synthesizers in books or on a few record covers, and I just wanted to learn about them. And it was kind of hard to find a modular synthesizer at that time, and I didn't know where the dope for dealer was, for example. I did at one point see a guy carrying a dope for system on a subway in New York City, and I kind of followed him for a long time and thought about just kind of tapping him on the shoulder, but then I also thought maybe that's not the best idea. In the end, I just started looking into how I could try to build one. And I actually got an unfinished Paya kit, and it came with none of the documentation, and at that time John Simonton was still alive, and I called the number on the little piece of documentation that was still with it, and he answered. And actually sent me the rest of the stuff I needed to finish the kit and whatnot. And it kind of just took off from there, building that Paya kit, and then deciding, well, I'd like to learn more about it. So I went to the Brooklyn Public Library, and a really good reference library there, full of out-of-date, which detailed, which was probably not of much use to anyone trying to get a college degree, but to me it was very interesting. So I spent a lot of time, and then this time our apartment was quite warm, full of analog reference text. It seemed like a good idea.
Inspired by the Brooklyn Library. I've been in New York in the summer. This is not an implausible story.
Right, and it didn't smell like trash, you know, like summer, because it's all out in the sidewalks. Founded, make noise. That's like a pretty fun word to throw around. I think it's pretty false. Also, there was no founding really. It was sort of like, oh, I'm going to make a few things. The first module, I made 18 of them. I actually made 20, so I could keep 2 and sell 18 to pay for the parts on the 2 that I kept. So I could basically get a couple of free modules out of it. So I don't think there was really any founding necessarily, aside from the fact that I started doing it on X date. I never thought that we would sell more than like 20 or 30 of anything that we make. But that wasn't a goal when I started it. It was more just, I really want to do this, and I can make some money doing it so I can build more stuff that's cool. And then it kind of grew from there. And I think that probably what happened is other people saw that maybe and thought they would give it a go too. And I think earlier when we were talking, somebody mentioned that just the ability to produce printed circuit boards has gotten exponentially easier over the years. I think maybe, Robert, you were talking about that. I mean, when I think about what, you know, someone like maybe Roger had to go through to get the first prototype boards for the Linn drum or the MP660 made back in the late 80s, compared to what we have to go through to get a 6-layer, beautiful actually, 6-layer board delivered in 24 to 48 hours. Yeah. I'm sure you didn't get your boards in 24 hours at that time. So I mean, the internet and just the general like speed of business and the speed of economy that's happened over the last few years has made it possible to really move quickly on projects, which makes it a lot more fun.
Well, so you've benefited from that. How has that changed, or where were the sort of inflection points in that trajectory from then to now?
Well, when I first started out, I was, about 23, and I didn't know what I was doing. I remember I made a deal with a guy to lay out the circuit boards, which required taking big sheets of Mylar and putting black tape on it. And then once I was bringing it back from him after he'd finished them, and it was a hot day in Los Angeles, and I left them in the back of my car and it shrunk them all up just a little bit. And then we made the boards, they were all just a little bit shrunk up. Oh, God. So I kind of learned the hard way through the School of Hard Knocks. But yeah, it is a whole lot better now, and I think it allows, I think one thing that is very beautiful about that is that when I walk through these halls in this show, this wonderful show, I find little one-person, two-person companies. And when I made my company in the 80s, where I made my drum machines first, I was up to about 55 employees.
Really?
Because you had to have a lot of people to put all those things together. But now I find it'll be a one-person company here, a two-person company here, and these people are just thrilled about the ideas. And I think what's wonderful about it is they're able to focus on the thrilling part and less on the busy part, on all the little fabrication details. I think many people here, my observation is they're in it because they love it. They're making these things because it's like writing a song, writing a piece of poetry. And sometimes when you have that creative urge and you make something beautiful, you are then bogged down in all this nonsense that you don't want to be involved in. There's one guy that visited my booth, and he's having trouble because he's making the panels of his module, he can't get the printer to silkscreen it to look good. And I thought, wow, that's horrible. And it just reminds me of so many times when I got bogged down in the details and it was doing things that I'm not good at instead of doing the stuff that I'm good at and that I really love doing. And so you can be a one-person company now, and you don't have to print 2,000 brochures. Everything's on the internet. If you make a mistake, you just change it. It's a wonderful time to be able to express your creativity in a variety of ways, and it's just energizing being here and seeing all these people with their creative ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. I have to find the mute button on my mic. Tony, on that, so with this idea of writing songs, here, beer cures everything. Of course, the worst thing to ask a songwriter is, where do you get your ideas? But as you started this process, how did you decide? Given that it is this easy to come up with a prototype, given that there's so many ideas out there and now so many modules, how did you kind of come about how did you decide which sort of modules to start with? What motivated you, and how do you make that decision now, especially as things are getting more crowded?
That's actually, the first part of your question is pretty easy to answer. At the time, I kind of looked at what was offered in the Dopefer system, and whatever was not offered in the Dopefer system would be something that could be of potential interest. And I know that some of my, like for example, my buddy Scott Yoder over at Harvest Man, he and I talked about this before. Part of the reason he started Harvest Man was to create a voltage-controlled decimator, which was something that Dieter wasn't doing, and at least at that time. And I kind of felt the same way. So we kind of looked at what was currently available. I think a lot of us kind of felt like the Dopefer system was it. That was the format. That was the main collection. What could you add to that collection? Obviously, if you've walked through these hallways at the Super Booth, you realize it's kind of gone beyond that. I used to try to keep track of every single release from every single company. At one point I even had a system I was trying to actually even buy many of the modules, but that's almost impossible at this point. There's well over 100 companies that are releasing 3-4 modules a year, so you're talking about hundreds of modules coming out every year. So we've definitely moved on quite a bit from that. So at this point, what I try to do is kind of focus on our instrument more than, what can we do that no one else has done?
Do you think of, in other words, your line of modules as a single instrument?
It's more and more. It more and more feels like a comfortable place to put energy into, because I feel like a lot of people who use something like our shared system, we just get so much positive feedback from that. So it makes me want to sort of advance on that. And so yeah, I do think about that a lot. For example, the Tempe sort of provides something that people always said was the one thing they felt like they were missing from the shared system, a more complex clock module. And so we made that, and of course made it a size that could fit into the shared system easily. Now that doesn't mean it doesn't work good with anything else, but that is kind of, there's definitely a lot of weight is given to that side of the design. And then additionally, working with someone like Tom Erb on the Sound Hack modules, for me, that's really exciting, because that's where you can do quite a bit of innovation. And I think there still is quite a bit of stuff that Tom and I can work on, and that hasn't been done yet, at least under voltage control. And I think when you add voltage control to something that has always been Interesting. Some people think that we're literally pulling sound hack algorithms and just kind of figuring out a way to put them into a module. Tom actually constructs the algorithms from scratch because we kind of have to. The reason is that the hardware has to operate in such a real-time way, and it has to process so many different analog inputs at once that he really kind of has to develop the algorithms from scratch. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, absolutely, that answers that question. Yeah.
So that's
and
really,
then but then additionally having that CV interface changes the way that people are interacting with it as an instrument.
that's what I'm told by many people. Yeah, I feel like I've fallen a bit out of touch with software synthesis. I admit I try to keep up with it. I take a pilgrimage to Richard Devine's house every few months and have him show me all the latest plugins and stuff so I can keep my finger on the pulse. But it's getting harder and harder. But what I'm told from most people is they say, well, I've worked with granular synthesis for years, but having it under voltage control is a whole new feeling for me. I could understand why.
I feel like if there were an apocalypse that wiped out the internet, probably Richard Devine's house is where we would all meet to try to recover. But that makes sense. Yeah. Well, but I mean, it's interesting to hear that, diversity. I mean, we have people here who've worked on things that are kind of traditional instruments in the hardware domain. This current phenomenon of modularity seems to be moving back towards complete instruments. So I mean, right, some of the criticism of Eurorack was these are all kind of incomplete ideas, which some people love. But then, at some point, if you have everybody making incomplete ideas, no matter how lovely it is to have this modular environment, someone would say, well, let's start to put things back together. And Roger, you were talking about that, this sort of modularity and then consolidation and then modularity. Well, since you're the kind of next in line, let's ask Robert to talk a little bit about, there was a time, Robert, where you would have like computer musician probably attached to your name. Now that's not, I don't think I would hope that nobody would do that. You have hardware at home and you have Eurorack and you do things that are very different from what other computer musicians do when you do go out and play with a computer. Where in your work would you define the stuff that you're using as an instrument? I mean, having been in the software business, is there a way of kind of defining a set of tools on a computer as a discrete instrument?
I think that's the most difficult question these days, because the computer is certainly not an instrument. It can be made into one by applying a process which creates musical results. A modular system is in an interesting way also not really an instrument because it's a collection of possibilities, and I always tend to think of an instrument as something which is a bit more closed. Like the Linn drum is an instrument because I have a clear idea what I do with it and I can master it because it's limited. And I think this is the biggest challenge these days, that we have unlimited possibilities in software, but also now we have unlimited possibilities in modular synthesis. And as someone who just recently decided to go down this hill buying modules, I'm facing now the problem that there's too many of them. And that instead of making music, I think of which module do I buy next.
Well, let me ask it a different way. And I don't know if I'm the only person on this stage that has spent some amount of time writing music on paper. Is anybody else, am I the only one who's done that?
What's paper?
Okay. I'm sure other people in this room have done this, right? But anybody who's ever composed music on paper is very familiar with the unlimited possibilities problem, right? Because you can sort of close yourself in a practice room, you sit at a beautiful Steinway piano, you have your like nice manuscript notebook there and your pencil, and then you look at the page and you realize you could actually do anything. You could make a big X over the score and try to make people interpret that. So it occurred to me, kind of listening to all of you actually earlier, that part of this question is not technological, but philosophical. And that question of how you limit possibilities in order to sit down and design an instrument or to sit down and make a piece of music. So to ask it that way, I mean, you've described the problem of too many choices. How do you go about devising a solution?
Well, I think, ironically, the situation is actually learning as much as possible. Because the more you know about what you're doing, the more you're capable to make informed decisions. If you really understand, for instance, what a compressor does, you might be happy with one single compressor and you don't feel obliged to buy a new one every week because a new one comes out which is supposedly be much better. So at least this is for me true for my modular synthesis approach these days. Since I know very well what I want to achieve, I can immediately rule out a lot of modules where I know they won't help me. And this is true in the sense of not going to Schneidersladen, but it's also true in the sense of looking at my system and having already an idea how to achieve something before I start. And as far as the hardware versus software, analog versus digital thing is concerned these days, what I find really funny is that I believe we are in this post-laptop era. Because basically I feel that making music becomes more and more a process where we don't want to sit on a computer. And that's very clear because we spend all our lives on a computer. And 25 years ago, when I started to seriously dive into what I'm doing now, looking at a green CRT display was a promise. It was a promise of something futuristic, of something new, exciting. And nowadays, looking at a computer is, oh God, another email from a person I don't want to talk to. So it becomes very clear that working with a modular synthesizer is a very nice departure from this world which is immediately connected to your Facebook account. And the day someone develops a Facebook module for modular synthesis, I'm out.
Hey, wait a minute. This is a good time to advertise the Ableton Connection Kit. I would have to play devil's advocate, so I'm going to do a series of advertisements. I think one advertisement will be for the Ableton Connection Kit, which allows you to do all of the things that we've just described as separate at the same time, which is, you get Max modules that let you work with control voltage, you get Max modules that let you talk to the internet. So they didn't have a Facebook API, but you could make your own Facebook API. You can connect both to kind of continuous control in the digital domain with things like OSC, but also continuous control in the control voltage domain. It's a kind of wonderful thing. Also true of Reactor. And these guys are showing that here. So one way to get away from the computer may be to turn off the computer and go over to a modular. Another exciting way to do that is the chance to put them together. And one solution to always having to run out and buy another piece of hardware is this. Once you start doing that, then suddenly realizing that you can look at your computer screen and just spawn a module, or if you know how to write DSP code, write your own module is also kind of a wonderful pleasure. So we're out of time, so we can't go into those discussions. But I'll just provide the advertisement so that people can go and play with them later. And also another thing that's quite nice I found is even the ability to plug in something like the Linnstrument, or I've been using one of your sort of colleagues in this revolution, the Raleigh, who are also here. And this is also wonderful. Like even just the moment that you kind of do that is kind of nice, just getting away from like a trackpad or something. Right? I would love to, I know that we're out of time, but I would love to take questions from the audience because you've been shrouded in darkness. And I would love to hear from you since we can't see for our distinguished panel. I can't see you to know that you do. Somebody says something, I don't know, step into the light, for instance. Or if you kind of wave your arms around, then I'll...
Now you're scared.
Or shout.
I was wondering, because you mentioned before, like, how to approach like an empty canvas or something. And I'm wondering, like, how do you see kind of where things are going as far as live improvisation, like really active action performance, and how this relates to digital or analog systems, or how you see this is.
That's going to be a tough question, running out of time, but it's an excellent question, and it's like, how do we see kind of live improvisation sort of feeding and physical performance feeding into the stuff that people do? We talked about the human as the modulation device. Yeah, let's take it.
Unless you had something to say, Ron.
I have my question.
When you go and buy an instrument, for instance.
Well, yeah, for those of you who may not know this instrument that I'm creating called the Linnstrument, it's a class of about 5 instruments now, like Peter mentioned, the Rolly's keyboard, and that we all, our instruments all capture 3 dimensions of touch, and so the idea is that you get the same sort of, or hopefully the same sort of expressive capabilities as playing a violin or a saxophone or acoustic instrument, but applied to contemporary sounds. And so what drove me toward making this is I saw a lot of people, including myself, making music by sitting at a desk in a dark room, alone, rolling a piece of soap around in front of a TV screen. And it didn't seem to be as fun to me as in earlier times. As a guitar player, I would get together with friends and play, and there were those moments when you capture lightning in a bottle, and the players just melded together into this one whole that was greater than the sum of the parts. Of course, in my case, there were a lot of the other times too that didn't quite work out. But some of those peak experiences are marvelous to me, and the idea of developing improvisational skills and all this happening in real time, and that engaging aspect of real time, that you can't, the next measure is going to come up and you got to play on the next measure. You can't go take a break or something like that. It's all real time and it captures your attention. And so I wanted to see in the instrument if I could create an instrument that you could play live, develop skills on in the same way that I did with piano. And so to me, it's a big part of what I'm hoping is a trend with, once again, the Rolly and the others, back toward live performance as opposed to offline editing. Mm-hmm. And actually, this is only part of it, but of course, because of course a lot of the products they're showing here are all about live performance of music. And so I think it's a very, very good trend. And things like what's Ableton Live Sync, or what Link it's called.
Link, yeah, Link is
that's
true.
Marvelous. I could have used that a few times up at my table up there because everyone was playing beats at different tempos. So I don't know if that's the answer to the question, but I think it's, in summary, it's a very, very good sign that instruments are moving from editing into more of a live performance state. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is connected, in my opinion, and what is one reason why so many of us are so much into actually hardware, is with software there's also always one step more to take. If you want to perform, for instance, or if you want to be spontaneous. Imagine more than one person in a studio. Can I have the mouse quickly? This doesn't ever work. And if I work with a modular system or with a hardware synthesizer with lots of parameters, and each parameter has a knob, there's this one layer missing, and this layer is I need to think about how to assign this parameter. It's just right there. And that makes it more likely that I change a parameter which I wouldn't change if it wouldn't be exposed. And the fact that these days we have granular synthesis, linear FM, and all kinds of digital manipulations, including reverb, in a module is fantastic, because we have everything we wanted from computers, like complex DSP, but at the same time, if we think the reverb needs to be shorter, it's quicker done than actually described. And if I think this is fantastic, but I would like to have an automation, LFO in there running, and that's for me the true beauty. And this ties into performance, because if I can do this in the studio quickly, then I can take all these things on stage and can do the same thing. And no more MIDI controller assignments, and that's kind of cool.
I hope that answered the gentleman's question.
Yeah.
Well, I would just like to add that we talked a lot with Roger earlier about performing with other human beings, other musicians. But I think a lot of people that I talk to, I think there's also something else. It's collaborating with the machine. And I feel like a lot of people who are using modular synthesizers, I think when they get that other module and put it in, or rearrange their modules or repatch it, they're creating a new machine to collaborate with. And yeah, and I mean, it's kind of fun too, as anyone who makes something that people make music with, you can't help but feel a little bit like maybe you're collaborating with some of those musicians that are out there, whether it's software or hardware or controller or whatever. They're all, whether they like to admit it or not, they are collaborating with the machine, and if you're a part of producing that machine, they're collaborating with you.
Well, and actually that's a good point too, that humans keep coming back into this conversation. So we talked about humans as the modulation source. It also makes a difference that when people know the humans who made the stuff that they make, right? This makes a big difference. And all of these trends that have happened in hardware, I think, are starting to transform software too, which is in a healthy way. Which is thinking about physical human control. It seems to be filtering back into software in a bigger and bigger way. I would also hope that there's more of an effort to kind of put the face of the people who design software on the software in the way that it's happened with hardware. And it's really interesting to watch it happen with apps, right? Because people know, like I know that Oliver made elastic drums, and I think his other users know that he made elastic drums. And so they know that there's this person who created what they built. And just like people know you, Tony, and they know that you made these modules. So
right, but I used Reactor for years, and I didn't know that this guy was the founder, actually.
Well, I mean, now sometimes there's more than, when it's a large organization, of course, it's hard to, you want to put a human face on it, but you also want to give credit to the whole team. But it's exciting to me, at least, that what had been kind of more anonymous, hopefully is not so anonymous, I would hope. That's my own editorialization.
And it's a very personal creation.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, of course, these are very personal creations. If you're involved in making something for artistic use, then you think a lot about how it might be used, how you'd want to use it yourself. It becomes really an expression of your aesthetics and how you see music being made. So yeah, there's a very personal relationship there, and it's I think people like to know.
Well, there we have it. We can close on that note, which is we don't know about analog or digital, but robot uprising. I think even Microsoft said, we're not really going to be able to compete with robots. But here at the Super Booth, humans are the future. Yay.
We are the future, but at some point the artificial intelligence will buy this for us.
Thank you. Thank you. The super mega panel.